Hi, all. My name is Jackie Del Monte. I work for a company called Allegiance Medical Partners. We are a boutique locum staffing firm, and we place physicians and providers on contract at hospitals all across the country. Excuse me. And I'm excited to have our panel here. So I'm going to hand it off to our panel to introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Jack Pally. I work at Flywire, headquartered here in Boston. I was told that a lot of folks on the call are potentially international students, which is where Flywire got its start. We are a global payments company. We do foreign exchange payments mainly, but a number of different other payments. But I work in our travel space. So I'll talk more to that, but work with our luxury travel providers.
I'm Kristen Curtis. I am a senior manager of CS at Postscript, which is an online SMS marketing platform. I've been there almost 2 years now and have been in e-com Shopify stores for the last 5 or 6, and mostly relatively small. So Postscript's my biggest startup at 200 people.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuti Bhargav. I am the Chief Customer Experience Officer at a company called OneSpan. It's a cybersecurity company focused mainly on digital signature, but with a lot of security backing it up. So we have a lot of big financial institutions using us for the mortgages that you guys sign and everything like that. So that's what I'm for, and excited to be here.
Great. I'm excited to actually hear all of your answers to these discussion questions. So why don't we kick it off? So in terms of, we all know that having a customer success playbook is extremely important. What would you say are some of the golden rules that everyone should follow? Jack, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think there's about 50 of them, but I'll just kick it off. Something that I value the most, frankly, is transparency with my client base. I think we oftentimes try to get into almost like a white lie situation where we don't want to fully say what's going on internally to our external client. For me, if I can build a great relationship with that person and then really tell them the truth about what's going on, allow them to know that, hey, I'm working on something, we're going to get this done for you. Thank you for your feedback, whether it be with our product team, our development team, etc. I think oftentimes we just get too caught up in saying have truth and then having to kind of walk our story back over time. And I don't know, I'm getting too over that, I think. I'm just you know what, I'm just going to tell the truth. Yeah. And let's just be honest, straight up. And I think that's really one of the big golden rules that I like to live by.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm the same in every way. But I think one of the things to me that's incredibly important is knowing that you are the expert. I find that a lot of people, they tend, because we're customer success people, we are people pleasers. And so we tend to just say yes and move on with the thing. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that they are the subject matter expert and they are there to even sometimes say, no, we can't do that. And here's why. And that's actually not the way to do it. I think that that's incredibly important for a customer success person.
It's huge.
Yeah. The great points, right? So I'm going to say something that's probably not as sexy, but it's really important, which is actually just being good at the basics, right? That's one of the things that most people forget, and they're very much into the glamour and the EBRs and everything, but actually just the basics of following up in time, providing the reports that people need, being there when they need them to be. It sounds really, really minor, but it's so important to just follow the basics, and that helps build that advocacy and that partnership, which is really what sustains it for a long term.
Yeah, you can't build trust with clients if you aren't doing those base level things. Correct. Right? And it's those follow-ups. I say I'm going to do this on this date. I say I'm going to go internally and ask these different questions. Even just a follow-up of saying, I don't have the answer yet, but this is where we're sitting with it. That transparency, exactly what you're saying. It's so key, or else you're just going to lose that trust right away.
An organization.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not organized, none of that will get done. Yeah. And so finding the right way to keep yourself organized to make sure that you do those follow-ups in a timely manner.
Yeah. And feedback, right? Like what you're talking about, okay, you're going to get something, an answer by a certain date. A lot of people think that if you don't have an answer by that date, let's not just tell them anything. But a lot of time just saying that I have a new date or I don't have any new information is such a good follow-up,
Yep.
which I get it. It's human instinct to not want to provide bad news, but it's not bad news. It's just an update.
or receive bad news.
Correct.
So the other thing that I've noticed is like some folks are afraid to like hear concerns, right? Because as a
Yep.
human, that's hard,
Hard.
but it is incredibly important as a CSM or client success person to understand that like you can't change things if you don't understand the concerns, and you need to know them as early as possible so you can make those changes.
And it's like a personal relationship, right? Where if you let things fester and you don't address those certain things, it always turns out bad, right? So the same thing with a client for me, what you guys are saying as well is like, I'd rather hear the bad, because if we can get the bad out of the way, we can figure out the bad, we can at least set the right expectations, then the good will come, But if it's all like puppies and rainbows, you're obviously doing something wrong, or your product is perfect and nobody's product is perfect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, you're just totally missing the boat on that if you're not hearing any bad news.
Perfect. I think those are all like phenomenal answers, just like the no update, not being scared of the negative feedback or any feedback. Great answers, guys. So in terms of fostering weaker connections, what are the pros and cons of spending time on fostering maybe those not as strong customer connections or the weaker connections? Whoever would like to start. Studi, why don't we start with
Yeah, sure. So, weaker connections, again, there's two, I'm going to address this in two ways. There's one is the human instinct that if this person's not easy to get, I'm not even going to even try.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a really pitfall. And the reality is that's when like working within the organization, whether it's your sales, counterpart or somebody in the organization to kind of figure out who the right person that in that weak relationship is really important. So you have to actually go out, work with sales to say, okay, my project person is not answering. Do you have someone one level above that can help? So that's one aspect of it. The second is really weak relations are there for a reason. Either the customer's overwhelmed, either they are just not using your product, or maybe it's going really well and they're past that stage where they need somebody that frequent. But the reality is you have to define what does it mean by weak relation. Where it becomes a health issue, like a CS health issue, is when you don't know, right?
Yeah.
A weak relationship is actually could be a sign of maturity, which is a good thing, but knowing that is important. If you don't know it and you're just like, I just haven't heard from this person and I'm in complete blind, that's when it's a risk.
Yeah. And I think like, how do you figure it out? It should be in your regular practice to ask the question, right? Like if you needed to renew today, would you? Or do you have any current concerns with our product? I think like being in a routine of asking those questions makes
That's right.
sure that those weak relationships don't continue to build, like we were just talking about, and then you don't know about it until it's too late.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that you like gave me a pit in my stomach when you don't know, the don't knowing is my least favorite thing. And I think part of it can, come from like weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, etc. But there is that aspect of when things are going good and they just don't need you. You're like, this is great. But when you just don't know and you're just like, hey, can we please hash this out at least, or at least just give me some feedback? Or can I bring my sales rep in or an implementation person in and have them try to find out from either that person or a different relationship? Because you just need to know what's going on, or else you're totally flying blind and you're probably doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, I think using the whole spectrum, right? Especially when you have an engaged customer, an unengaged customer, like not just has sales talked to them, how can they help? Maybe the implementation specialist had talked to them, but also like, have you brought in your executive? Would they be helpful there?
Yeah.
How do you get them involved? Because I think to me, that is the hardest part about CS is a customer who has been dark forever.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get them? And I think you have to use every weapon in your arsenal.
For sure.
And on that, sorry, one thing I've tried a bunch of time and it's actually worked is kind of having this contact mapping, right? A relationship mapping for a customer. And again, you want to be strategic of where you're investing that. But to your point, right? Like you might not have that relationship, but somebody else might. But making that explicit and saying, okay, this one is important. There is an exact relationship. Are they going to reach out to them every 2 weeks? No, we don't want that. but being explicit that we want you to meet on a, or at least engage in a quarterly basis.
Mhm.
Because the problem in a lot of times, if you do it once, is the next time you're going to reach out when there's a problem.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's not relationship. I mean, if you think in your own personal life, if you have friends and your network, and if the only time you ever reach out to them is when you need something or you want something, those aren't true fostering relationships. So apply that same logic with your customers to figure out where does it become sustainable.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is like, are there maybe different metrics to look at as well, right? Like if you're sending, so in where I work, it's a marketing company. And so ultimately what we're trying to get them to do is understand best practices and send messages, right? So if you're unengaged with me, but every time I send you a suggestion, you take action, that to me is
Very
engaged
good.
and fine.
Absolutely.
Right. So like understanding what are our goals, what are we trying to do with this customer, and is it happening, but happening, just not the way I would expect it to,
Yeah.
that's still okay. So like thinking through what are those signals, I think is important too.
I love all of that. No, those are great answers. So again, a little bit more on the customer relationships, and a little bit more granularly in terms of practices. What practices have you found to be particularly successful when it comes to fostering relationships with your customers? Why don't we start with you, Kristen?
Yeah, one of the things I was just thinking about as we were talking about the unengaged is we use a lot of looms. And I don't know if, no? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So looms are awesome. Basically what it is it's like it's a video recording tool, and you can record yourself, or you can record your screen, or both. And anybody can watch it. So you can just send the link and they watch it right away. And so we actually use that internally, but in terms of customers, especially if they're hard to get engaged with, we find sometimes sending them a video of yourself. First of all, especially if you have like a detailed thing you're trying to explain to them, it's way easier to do it in a video than it is in an email. And I think it's important to test what works with different customers as well. Some people want to receive information that way, and some people don't. But I think it's a really cool tool to get information across to folks if maybe you have an engaged merchant, but they're on vacation and you don't know their manager, but you want to get information out there. Like that's a good way to introduce yourself via an email or something versus a meeting. So I think
That's really cool. It's
Oh,
like
really?
putting an actual face to the name.
exactly.
Yeah.
I know I've gotten a few of those from sales folks, and I actually love it because it just humanizes people so
Mhm.
quickly, and people usually do something funny on it too. So I'm like, oh, you're okay.
Yeah.
This is way better than a cold email. But for client services, I do agree that is it's just such a better way than being like, hey, do you have 30 minutes to chat? Like, can we get the whole team together? It's like, I'm just going to send you a quick link. Here's this. I do love that. On your question, we've used marketing really well, I think, at Flywire. And so one of our huge travel providers in Iceland, we did a case study with them. And it's with our head of finance over there, which isn't the sexiest role. And he has this awesome case study, and he's wearing this black turtleneck. He looks like Steve Jobs or something. And we play it on loop at conferences now. And so every time they'll take a picture at a conference, I'll send it to him. I'll be like, hey, Magnus, check this out. You're a star. And it just goes such a long way. And we went and visited them, and I joked, I was like, to his whole team, I was like, we're going to go to the bar after this, and we're going to play this on repeat. And then Magnus is going to reenact it. And it was like, it was a good way to just break the ice. But I felt like that was that, or joining like boards or doing panels with clients. Like it just gets the name out there and makes them feel so much more special and engaged. So that's something that we've used.
That's a really good call with marketing. We use our merchants a lot for like webinars and stuff. So, marketing comes to our CS team. Who should we use for this topic, that topic? And to actually get their faces in front of other merchants, I think is a huge way to engage them too.
Yeah. The other area that, a lot of us are very good at engaging at that exec level or at our, at the corporate level. What we also do is actually, and it's beneficial for companies, but for, our internal engineering team is we actually try to reach out to the end users and the technical folks and try to bring them to like technical user conference or technical usability studies, and they love it. It's a very untapped area, I feel, because these are the guys you just take they're the ones actually using the product, and they love being able to give that feedback. They love being able to interact and see what others are doing. And in reality, while it might not be exactly the relationship with the executive, these are the folks that are actually letting the executive know whether they like your product or not, whether they actually use it. And a lot of times we basically target customers with low usage. And after these type of events, the usage tends to go up because a couple of reasons. A, they're intrigued. B, usually whatever the reason that or the difficulty they're having of using the product, they bring that out and they feel they're heard.
Yep.
The other thing I would say is, at least for us, goals are incredibly important. It's very easy to come to a call and just have a conversation and it be like, you didn't prepare anything because you know the product and it's easy to get on and just have a conversation. And I think like proving the value every time you're having a conversation, like, here's your goal, here's how we're achieving it, this is how we're going to do X to get you even further, I think is something that sometimes just goes by the wayside because people are busy and they, do whatever. But that's how you really engage a customer and keep them involved.
Oh, I love that.
It seems like 101, but I think it's not always.
I agree with that. Like, I think I sometimes downplay it myself, but every time I get off a call, I'm like, okay, everything that I said had meaning. Hopefully, there's a lot of fluff, but I'm truly trying to prove value at every turn. It's not always in your face to the customer, but at least even asking the certain questions that you're asking or going down certain paths, it's like you need to have your strategy in your head so that you're at least trying to get stuff out of them at all times and prove the value at the same time, without, it's almost subliminal. And I think when you've done it for a long time, it's just natural, but that's something like starting out that you really need to focus on, to your point.
Yeah. And the other thing I've heard, which I really like, is you should be coming away from every call with a different learning about your customer. So to the point you're making, like if you're not asking all of these questions and digging in to understand their needs of their business, not just of the platform itself, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, there's one I'm going to go back to product, right? Like, so for me, so many of the CSMs ask me, like, what does it take to be a good CSM, right? And I'm like, end of the day, you don't have to be the technical expert on your product, but you need to know your product, right? Because what nobody wants to be on a call where they ask a simple question, they're like, let me get back to you on that, and sort of be that person who's just routing information. Now, you're not expected to troubleshoot, but you need to know your product, right? So again, product being the center of it, we started working with our product marketing to say, how do we, it's astonishing how few customers know of the new features and functionality that comes out. And when I talk to the CSMs, they're like, "Oh, we brought this up. We showed them this, this one slide in our deck that we showed on our status meeting." And what started happening was we said, "Okay, no, we need more. We're going to do these webinars." And I'll give you an example, which I think it always sticks with me, which was we were just basically launching this new self-service portal, right? Like, this was launched from a company perspective. We were marketing it at that. We are launching this new portal. It's amazing. Look how much we invested in it. It's so good. And it really did not attract as much attention. And so what we did is we said, okay, let's turn it around to try to address a pain point that a customer had, right? And the pain point the customer had is for every little thing, they had to log a ticket or get on a call with somebody. And so we basically changed that feature to be not about what's exciting to us as a company, but what's their pain point. And we said self-service, less tickets logged for, whatever, something of that. Not only the adoption of that feature, but the number of people who attended that session and who remembered it went really, really up. So again, I'm going to say, keep coming back to the product and what's important to your customers, rather than it being like a checkbox in your arsenal that I have to go through these bunch of stuff. It really becomes more impactful.
Yes. And I would say another counterintuitive point to that is you do actually have to repeat yourself.
Correct.
To get them engaged.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how many times has your manager said, like, you need to do this thing, or we have this new thing, and within 2 weeks you're like, what was that thing? Like, that is absolutely what's going on with the customer. Right. So it's okay. Like, it feels like it's so much to you because you live in your bubble. Right. So like, you hear about this specific thing all the time. So of course my customers know about that thing. That is not their world. And so remembering that they don't know just because you feel like you're saying it all the time is another way, I think, to continuously keep them engaged and make sure they don't forget things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We live our jobs, we live our companies, and it could be 1% of what our clients focus on, or 5% or 20 if you're lucky. But it truly is just like continuing to prove the value, continuing to tell them again and again, right? And if you're not doing that, like, why would they remember it? Unless it's some, whatever it might be.
They were
Yeah.
waiting for it forever,
Yeah,
and maybe
exactly,
they'll
yeah.
remember.
They've
Yeah.
wanted this feature forever. Yeah, but it is so true. And I do think, to your point, Suti, like, our product team, we ask them for all these different things. And when they do provide a certain thing, and if it's our job to then go out and teach our customer about it and really put it in front of their face and say, hey, remember you asked about this? We finally have this.
Yeah.
And then there's 50 other customers that, I think this would be a great fit for as well, but that's our job to go out there. They don't know that this product feature is available. So I'm sure it makes products so angry when they create something and put so much work into it with their devs, and then we don't push that. So I'm always to my team like, hey, if we ask for it and it comes out, let's get it out to the masses. Like, let's make sure people know about it. Let's show the adoption, those video blooms. Like, let's do a video training. Let's do something. Let's do a webinar. Like, we need people to know about this so that we get adoption, and then we can ask for more.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Otherwise, they're not going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can't be the boy that cried wolf and ask for a product and never use it,
Perfect. I actually really love that. I think what all of you guys are saying a little bit, which I think can be applicable to so many industries, is just kind of tailoring what it is that you're selling to that pain point, the what's in it for me. Like, and then this is what I have, and this is how it helps. What's in it for you? Perfect. So on to the next question. What strategies can businesses use to nurture relationships during that early to growth phase in a company? And why don't we start with Jack?
Early to growth stage for your client or your company's growth?
For the company's growth. I think it's to nurture the relationships with your new customers.
I guess we could take this a number of ways. I'll say a strategy that I do love that I've been using more is shared Slack channels. Not like a plug for Slack, but
I hate it.
yes, yeah. It's like having people on WhatsApp and they're like Friday night, like, hey, I have a issue. I'm like, it's Friday night. But something. So obviously we all use internal messaging because we wanted to move away from internal company emails, right? So it's the same thing for me with an external client where it's emails. It's just like, all right, I'm going to answer you in 3 hours. Then you're going to get back to me the next day. Then this problem has gone for 2 days, right? And the same thing with the calls. Can we always jump on a 10-minute, 15-minute, whatever call, or just call me on my cell phone is easier? Doesn't always work that way. So we have a few clients that are on shared Slack channels, and it's just awesome. It's just so much more natural and not buddy, but it's definitely just a lot more like we're all on the same team here. And people are throwing emojis out there and you're like, oh, we're all friends here, especially if something goes wrong, when it goes wrong. But that's something that I've really enjoyed, where it's not a lift at all. It's essentially free to do it and has allowed me to be in much better contact with my clients.
It was a time lift.
Yes.
The one thing I would say from an early to a growth is I think starting unscalable and then deciding when you get to the point that we need to scale, what does that look like, is incredibly important. My last job, I was number 5. And so it was me with all of our customers, and I was bear hugging all of them, right? Because it's a brand new company. It's a brand new concept. We might not have all of the analytics that they need to, prove a point. And so I am your value at that point. As you grow, you have more value and you have the ability to scale. But I think in the beginning, it's like, I'm going to help you in any way possible. And I'm going to show you every way that this is valuable. And that is going to take me a lot of time. But once we get to the point where we have better value and we have like more to prove, we can think, how does that scale? But initially it's just stay with me, please.
Yeah. So, it's counterintuitive, but when you're in early stage, like every customer is so important, right? And everyone at every level is just like but I know this is going to be counterintuitive, but actually at that time, it's even more important to segment your customers because you really have to be picky, and it's going to be, and the reason I say is segmentation is internal, right? Like it's for your purposes, but you make explicit decisions. So exactly what you were saying, which is what everyone ends up doing is saying, let's bear hug all our customers. But what actually ends up happening you end up spending more time with the ones that are engaged, not the ones that are actually the value add, right? And so segmentation is really, really important because you have to actually be explicit saying these are our top tier customers. We have to have a certain level of engagement, extra bear hugging and everything, right? But in those early stages, actually it's also super, super important to identify those high potential customers with your sale, which might not have a high dollar value, but actually are your most highest growth potential. But you have to be picky because again, everyone's going to say every one of my customers is most important, but that's just not reality. So counterintuitive where you might have 100 customers and everyone seems important, it's actually more important to segment because to your point, you don't have a team of 10 people managing them. So you want to be very explicit of who you're
And using
supporting.
them for marketing too,
Exactly.
right? Like when they're really important to you, make them feel incredibly important.
Absolutely.
So find those ways to like, if we lose this because this is reality.
Yeah.
If we lose this customer, this business might be in huge trouble, right?
Right.
So like, what do we do with them to prove value to them constantly? And I think thinking outside the box and using different ways to do it is
Correct.
incredibly important.
And they're early adopters, right? I mean, if it's a startup and they're using your product, they're already early adopters. To your point, where if they are actual advocates, use them. They want to be in front for you, right? So it's really, really important to think of it like not one size fits all. Be strategic of where
Yep.
you're going, but constantly keep moving that. So for that high potential customers that I'm talking about, every QBR that we had with our sales, I would show them the list and say, you guys put all of this, there's been no sales or no upsells on any of them. Is this still your list that you want to do?
Mhm.
And if anyone comes with you, say, all my customers are important, move on because they don't know what they're talking about then.
Yep. The other thing I would say that's important is understanding the difference between support and success, especially at that stage.
Yes.
I think a lot of people do one versus the other in the wrong way, and it just sets you up
For failure.
for failure. Sometimes you'll hire a customer success person. They're so excited and they go in and they're like, this is not success, right? And then you have to pivot and think through all of it. So I think it's really important to determine immediately what is one versus the other and what are our needs and how are we going to think about both of them.
That's right.
Do you two find that with those super early clients, that even if they become a small revenue portion in years in the future, that you keep them super close at all times just because they were
They're the OG.
Yeah, they OGs.
Yeah.
And I can think about it so clearly. I still, dealing with some of the largest accounts that our travel vertical has, but I still have some of the smaller ones that were those day ones. And same thing, I was that first person, and I still they are the ones that have sent me like gifts from my child and like those type of things where you've just held these relationships for 2, 5, 10 years. And
Actually, that's another great point, right? In the early stages, you should also think through those things.
Yeah.
Right. There are ways for you to give them maybe it's just a $15 Starbucks gift card to say thank you, right? It can be a little thing, but
Handwritten birthday card.
exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's the thing, right? Like when 2 jobs ago, we were at I think we had 200 customers, and for Black Friday, because Black Friday is obviously huge for e-commerce, we did a Black Friday toolkit. And we came together as a CS team and we built these little toolkits and we send them to our top 5 customers each.
Yeah.
And it just resonated so well. And I think when it's especially in starting stage, it's also very easy to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You only have so many customers.
Yep.
And so surprise and delight them.
more
To-
personal.
Yeah. To give them-
And make sure, to your point, no one has ever sent me gifts, so I'm gonna go back to my customer and have that
Gifts are the
conversation.
best part.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah,
should I
I know.
put my address and my signature, and my Amazon wish list? But we did my first startup, not my first startup, startup first group of our strategic customers. We had our cab. It wasn't really truly a true cab, but it was. But we created sweatshirts where we actually said the original, member.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was amazing because then, not all of them obviously made it to the bigger cabs later on, but they still had those. And in a lot of our events, they would wear it because it makes them feel special.
Yeah.
Right? And it go back to end of the day, CS is all about empathy in people.
Mhm.
And the more you can connect to them and more you can make them feel special, that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember the bug they had and the case number. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And it's amazing how sweatshirts and water bottles are they hit the right spot in
Mhm.
people.
I love swag. Perfect. I think we have an audience question. Oh, perfect. Yeah. There we go.
So they can hear us online. Someone had reached out online. Hello. Yes. On the topic of the first initial clients that like they're the OGs, they're the ones that kind of ride with you forever. But how can the founder make sure that they're building something that's scalable and not specific to that one customer, where they have a customer of one, right? And they can't really grow, because that sometimes happens where it's almost like an exclusivity agreement without being an exclusivity agreement.
Yeah, so I'll answer that because that's actually very close to me. So, the huge part of CS, which is important to me because my background, I was a product manager before. And a huge part of what I like to do is making sure that the information and the feedback from customers goes back to the product organization, right? And the reality is, if you're a founder and you're early stage, you got to build it on that one person. You just have to, right? But it's about being smart and not having your 100% of your cycle going to that one. You have to, and it doesn't matter if you're a early stage or if you're a billion-dollar company. Your roadmap has to be segmented into customer feedback, competitive roadmap, and visionary new business, right? So those are where you have to segment it, but the percentages of these three categories changes depending on what phase you are. And in initial phase, actually, to be reluctant to build for that one customer, it's okay to do that. It's okay because you're still building your brand, you're still building your value, and you can scale beyond that. If you actually alienate your customers at the early stages, it's going to be harder for you to actually get true feedback.
Yeah, and you don't have product market fit yet.
Correct.
Right? So like, what is product market fit? It's fitting into the market. Currently, your market is that one customer.
Exactly.
But I do think that also having conversations, if you have more than one customer, which I hope you do, having conversations with your other customers and understanding, like, is this need of this customer going to help you at all? And help you understand like how important
Correct.
is important. But if your main customer is ultimately your goal, I want 1,000 of those customers, then you do need to build for them, right? Like if you want an amazing customer and all the other ones are teeny tiny, and your goal is to have this enterprise customer, then you need to build for the enterprise customer.
Great answers. Another audience question.
I apologize. I came a few minutes late, and you might have answered this already. I'm doing a startup in AI for the enterprise, and my problem is I have to figure out if I try to find customers at big enterprises or medium enterprises or startups who don't have AI. I need an early adopter. So what's a good approach to kind of target the right type of customer? Because you're saying sometimes you have a single customer, you build a company around that. So that really determines what happens in the future. Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first stab at it. Early on in our travel vertical, I'll say, which has been now 6-7 years, we went after some really large names, and we were kind of in that thought of like, let's get this whale, and then we'll build a product around this. It was like a complete and utter failure because it was just so much to bite off at one point. And we found that if we went back to the SMB space, that there was at least going to be enough revenue coming in, but we'd probably have to sign a number of different logos. And for us in our space, again, just speaking from personal experience, that worked really well to then get us to a place where now we do have a really great enterprise base because we laid the foundation. I just have like flashbacks and nightmares almost of trying to capture that enterprise right away. It probably works in certain markets, etc. And I can't speak to AI or what you're trying to do, but to me, it was such hard yards, and we never really made it that far with it because there's just too many decision makers, too many opinions in the room, too many folks it impacts. And with an SMB, it was like, let's solve this small problem. There's only 3 people making the decision. and this is great. Like that to me, that's where we really found success. Small to medium
Small
sized
to medium.
business. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be defined by a number of different like revenue categories for where you're going to sit. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with product. And I also can't speak to AI, but we did very similarly where because the tool is SMS, still relatively new. And so you had to start small to be able to grow that audience a bit, to start to get people to understand what it was before like the company is like 6, 7 years old now. And like, we're just now really focusing on those, like what we call super enterprise, right? The like the names, and it takes a lot of time. I think if your product is specifically made for larger businesses, then like that's where you have to go. And so maybe it's just more of like a crowdsourcing of how would this benefit your business, and you might be able to find that like this specific vertical has way more benefits to what we're doing than this one and that one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you're in your early stages, product market fit is not you getting people to validate what you already thought was right. You don't need, if that's what you're going after, you don't need people to do that, right? Like what you're trying to actually see is what is their pain point, and is your product able to meet that? So I would actually not limit myself to one area and just focus on that, right? I would actually maybe have a sampling of customers within that for you to not only determine do you have a right product market fit, but at this stage, which is an easier barrier to entry, right? Like maybe it's a perfect fit for enterprise, but for you to be competing, let's say against like a Microsoft, you're not ready for that. Maybe you make your entry more towards the SMB. So I just wouldn't like the single threadedness is what is really hurtful. Like you got to do a lot of experimenting and testing and validating. But the biggest thing with validation is do not try to validate what you already know. The biggest validation is being open to be actually proven like I was completely on the wrong track. Loads of success stories of people start off actually somewhere completely different, realize that there's a different market for it, and adapt to it, right?
And loads of failures are I'm building this thing. This is the thing I'm building, and no one cares.
No one cares. Yeah.
I think too the unsaid thing is who do you know, right? Is it if you have good connections at Microsoft or at an like go for it, then that's awesome. For us, we were coming into a market that we didn't know anybody, so we had to tailor our sales strategy differently. But if you can use personal connections, professional connections, and it is at the enterprise level, hell yeah, do it. But yeah, I think to your guys' points, it really is going to be very dependent on what you're trying to provide to the market.
Love that.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I'm happy to have found my way to this panel because it was really what I needed. I present myself. I'm Rim from Tunisia, and I'm making a trip through different states in the US these weeks. And we happened to arrive to Boston yesterday, and this is the first panel I am in. So I'm glad to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm a small business owner from Tunisia, and one of my issues or challenges now is I have built through a few years now good customer relationships with my direct customers, particular customers. Now I'm really having a hard time to arrive to retailers, especially to retailers abroad of Tunisia to scale up. So if you have any advices to how to build a relationship with B2B or retailers, not to direct customers, it would be helpful for me because it's different type of relationship, and I'm not sure I found my way into that yet. Thank you.
I think one thing I'll say is I don't know if you've heard this term, but I mean I have this in every company I go is like the partner success manager, which is not a customer success manager. It's a partner success manager. And they're different. They're different folks who are not really about, the traditional usage and program and operationalization. They're much more about building those relationships based on what you want from your partner, right? So a good place to start is actually channel partners like who have been in sales, but who have a good relationship model. They would love to do like PSM. It's a really bad acronym, but partner success management. And it has to be thought of as a different mentality than a CSM. So a lot of people, they say is like CSM is just going to have another partner as part of the portfolio. And I would advise you, if you have enough of a quorum, to actually invest in a separate person with a different mindset and everything to focus on those areas.
Great stuff. Another question?
Yeah, were there any books like for someone who's just starting out here that you'd recommend, or blogs of just like this is really good like content or good processes to get CS off the ground for an early stage company?
This is such a. I personally, this is just a random one I've always loved, but how to what is it? How to win friends and influence people, or how to Dale Carnegie, the old
Yeah,
school.
that's
I always love that one.
There are a couple, what I've really enjoyed is there are a couple different CS Slack channels. And I can't remember off the top of my head the name, but I will look when we're done and I will give it to you. But when I was starting to grow the customer success department, that was so helpful because you have a whole lot of other CS folks trying to do the same thing you're doing, and just a big community where you can ask questions, see what other people are asking. I found that more helpful than like a book or a blog or something like that.
It's-
Go ahead.
Well, it's so funny just how different our products probably all are, but how similar all of our experiences are together. And I think as well, like there's a ton online about key account management, as it's called. And we have somebody internally at Flywire who's really focusing on kind of managing a ton of relationship managers, client success people, and providing knowledge on key account management. And there's like what he's been finding online about all this has just been such good information. He kind of updates us weekly on something new. And it's always kind of a fun thing to look at on Friday morning to be like, all right, I obviously don't know everything about client services. Like, let me keep learning and learning. So that's something that I would probably type in, but I don't necessarily have any specific blogs or books that I've, a lot of on the job stuff, I guess, a lot of trial and error.
Perfect. Another question? Perfect.
Hello, thank you. There we go. First of all, I appreciate the sort of the sentiment of fostering a relationship with your sort of first customer. Actually, recently I just sent my very, very first customer a gift basket from Edible Arrangements because they booked with me again.
Congrats.
Yeah,
Thank
I was
you,
like,
thank
that's
you.
huge. Retention, yeah.
Yeah, and I like it. You said they won't remember the bugs, but actually, for me, they will remember the bugs because that's what I do. So I was wondering if you guys have any advice or feedback on establishing relationships with the public sector, especially like I'm trying to market to public schools, and it's typically occupied by people who are extremely busy. They don't have a lot of time. They don't like products being sold at them. The mindset of a public service is very different from a place of a marketing product, and typically they kind of don't really want to hear you in the first place. And in fact, literally, locations are hard to get into. There's security that won't even let you in to talk to somebody. And I'm wondering sort of what advice you might have on building those relationships with somebody who may not, with like an entire field that may not want a relationship with you in the first place.
I think to start off with would be it's a tough one, right? Because you're breaking into a new area. But in public sector, there's a couple of things. One, has to be in person. They just do not. They're not good with remote. They just don't. Second, if you have anybody in your current customer base that is either connected or has credibility in those regions or in that area, use them. Like public sector is very, again, we talked about early adopters. Like public sectors are not early adopters, right? They are risk averse. They don't like all that stuff, but they love credibility. So if you know someone in that area, doesn't even have to be like, a lot of people actually in early stages hire folks that have those relationships, but have nothing to do with your product or your company, but just to kind of get that foot in the door. So you just have to get creative. I don't think there's a golden answer to that. I don't know if you guys.
No, the only thing I was thinking was I think it's important to go back to what we were talking about before about like showing them the value, not here's what I do, but here's what you need and here's how I'm going to solve it. I think is incredibly important in just how you're crafting how you're actually going to speak
Yeah.
to them.
Actually, that's a great point. Maybe change your tactic to be like a sell rather than a sell, like just listen. Just listen to what their pain point is, what they're trying to run into, if they're trying to break into a new area, what their challenges are before you even ever pitch them anything you're doing.
Like go in and ask questions, not talk.
Correct.
Yeah, I like
Correct.
that.
There was one question
Sure.
online that was just for the early stage founder when they're hiring their first CS person, true CS
Mhm.
person. Should that, well, first of all, where would they go about finding that person on one hand? And then should that person also kind of be leading the sales charge at the same time, kind of a dual role?
Great question.
No.
No.
I like we were both like,
We
no.
both like, no.
Well, what's funny is honestly, I think a lot of CS people could be good salespeople, but there's a reason why they're not in sales. So I think there are two completely separate roles. In terms of where to find them, I will say from my own experience, because I was that person, I was actually found on one of those Slack channels. I had someone who the investor of the business had a partner, and that partner was out trying to find this person's first CS employee. And so they went on the public CS Slack channel, looked at people's resumes and looked to see who fits the role, and then just started reaching out like, hey, are you interested? Because I think the fact of the matter is like the person who's going to be interested is a very specific person.
Mhm.
And so you're going to be having to ask a lot of people. And so I think being on a Slack channel where there is a lot of people to choose from is probably a good way. And then I will say in general, like LinkedIn is also helpful. Like I get a lot of messages of like, hey, and usually it's, small businesses. I'm looking for a head of CS. Are you interested? And sometimes I am. Currently I'm not, but sometimes I am, so I think just like, again, crowdsourcing a bit and finding those who make sense for what you're looking for.
Yeah, so I'm going to have a slightly different approach, which is, and we were talking about this actually right before this session, which is when early stage head of CS, is it truly head of CS or is it actually your first CSM? They're two very different roles. And my advice, you should be your first CSM. You haven't even have a practice before you come up with a head of. And your first CSM actually might be someone internal to the company. You actually don't need someone who's coming from outside. You need that in your next step, right? But your first step is someone who understands the product, who is passionate, could be from the product organization, could be actually from the support organization, could actually be the other way around, a salesperson who's actually not going to do the sale.
Yep.
But I would actually say start with that because you're just establishing. And then when you come to any sort of scale, I wouldn't even say scale, but any sort of growth, that's when you reach out.
I agree with that. Though I do think if you're a small enough business, you might not have somebody
Correct.
internal. But I 100% agree with it makes, and only from experience, it makes way more sense to hire a seasoned CSM to be the first CSM because they'll have opinions, they'll have seen it in a couple of different ways. They can kind of, determine what makes sense for that business. But when you hire a head of or whatever, they are just a CSM. They do not have the bandwidth to be able to build a department. There is not a department.
Yeah.
And honestly, for somebody who is truly seasoned and is ready for that step, it's like a discouragement, right? You take that role, you're excited, and then you're like, I'm a CSM. Like I've gotten out of that. I'm no longer interested.
You need to be able to roll up your sleeves, right? Because you're coming into a fire at all times, even with a great product. And so if you're not willing to do the job and you thought you're going to be the director or the VP or whatever it is, it's like, no, you're right back in the trenches. And that's how you're going to learn it. That's how you're going to be able to teach the next number of folks that you guys hire. But I fully agree with you on that. It's a big jump. And if you want a good CSM, give them a lot of equity,
Yes. And the other thing I would say is like, be aware of when you should hire and hire before you should hire.
Yes.
Right. Like, because part of the problem there is, you have little resources, and so you're afraid to bring on more people, and then you drown the few people who you actually have. So I think being aware that it's important to bring more people on before you're like, we need it, is incredibly important too.
Perfect. Okay, we have a few more questions. How much? About 5 more minutes? Oh, no, I would love to actually just continue on the. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I'd love to get the engagement.
Let's see. So, can you talk a bit about nurturing relationships in a service business versus, looks like service business versus more of like a product business? So, service being recruiting, coaching, marketing, or pure SaaS model, pure product. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Keep me accountable. The question was, can you talk a bit about nurturing relationships in a service-oriented business, recruiting, coaching, marketing, as opposed to product or SaaS-based business?
I mean, one of the things I love about this whole CS is that it's not one size fits all, right? It is so dependent on what you need, when you need it, what state of the company you are. And I mean, for me, like when I hear that, and again, it's literally one sentence, so I have no context. I would say you need someone, if you want a CSM, you need someone who's much more of a sort of a teaching role, right? Like again, not a project manager necessarily, but someone who's teaching. It kind of go back to your question on partners, right? Like, I mean, you have to just find the right person for that role. It doesn't matter if the title said CSM before or not. That's the key. Like CSM is not a title. It's what you do. And lots of different people from different areas. So for me, when I hear service oriented stuff, the difference becomes you're more project based. And so you're much more of like an implementation, that mentor, kind of that kind of a role. And so if you're recruiting, again, don't look for people who have prior CSMs in their title or anything like that. Look for the type of things you want them to do and make sure you're adapting them to that.
Yep. I completely agree with that. I think that is true across the board.
Correct.
A personal story real quick. So I was a social media manager for 8 years, and I was so nervous to change. It was 8 years of my, beginning of my career, like, oh, I'm going to move. And I went to CSM, and everything translated perfectly because I went to a marketing role where when I was a social media marketer, I was teaching people how to do social media, and then became a CSM in a marketing company. And it was like I had been a CSM the whole time. Right. And so if you find a person who's been doing similar things to what the CSM needs to be doing, you found the right person. And I think that is true regardless of if it's service, SaaS, product, whatever.
Yep.
I was like, I have a random, just because I am a recruiter. I would say I work a lot on referrals too. So I think just like doing what it is that you said that you're going to do, even if that means bending over backwards in the beginning to get it done, word of mouth is very impactful in terms of like being in recruitment myself. So do we have any other questions on that? Oh, perfect.
More, and you have a question here?
It's not a question. It's just to add that I have never heard about this kind of title before. I have worked in France for 12 years and 5 years in Tunisia. CSM, it's new to me. I mean, it's not maybe well known here in the USA, but I never heard about it in my career. So it's new for me, but yeah, the job that you do, okay, I understand. I have seen people doing that, but without this title.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I mean, I think even the role CSM is only 6 or 7 years where it's actually been popular here and people have known. It's existed for a long time, but it's had a lot of different names until relatively recently.
That's right. And Europe is like, so most companies didn't need this because they were in these type of business that were like a one-time sell, right? It's a SaaS world that completely modified the need for CSM because suddenly you have people that it's not a one-time sell. You are selling them on a yearly basis and the switching costs are so easy. Mm-hmm. And Europe and other areas are now starting to face that because people don't realize the need, which is a big issue, as you were talking about, hire way before you need it, is by the time you start seeing the symptoms or the bleed, by the time you get that person, what they're doing is reactive mode. which is the opposite of what a CSM is doing. So to your point, it honestly, and even the titles now are changing. I mean, you can't LinkedIn anything, and I'm like, I have no idea what this title means,
What
right?
does that mean?
It really doesn't. I mean, there's like, just between client and customer itself, you're just like, anyway. But the point is, it's what is the outcome? What are they trying to do? And what is the type of person? The only thing that you'll have an easier time by standardizing a little bit on these titles is if you're working with anyone in the US, it's becoming much more of a thing. Like people now ask, if an enterprise and investing in a vendor, they're going to ask you, where is my CSM? What is my plan to be successful in deploying your product?
So we're down to about our last minute here. I think the last question that I saw that was pretty interesting was, for those that are hiring their first CSM or someone in this realm, I know it's a relatively nascent term for US and across the world, but what are the characteristics they're looking for in that person?
Ooh,
Ooh, I love that question. So personally, because I've been doing a lot of these lately, my first thing is curiosity. I think curiosity is incredibly important when you're a CSM. Empathy is also incredibly important. And to go back to one of the things I was talking about, I'm going to say this very directly, and I'm sure there's a better word for this, but like the ability to push back is incredibly important. Somebody who can understand, like, I need to talk about this thing and it's okay for me to disagree if it's the right thing, I think is really important. And sometimes this is not a great word, but I think it does come with confidence. It comes with the, ability to just like stand your ground and have the conversation that you need to have and not be afraid of negative feedback. And so like, those are my big three.
I like that. The customer is always right, but the customer is not always right.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yep.
I think that's what I've learned over my career so far is like, especially when you know your product so well and you know all these other things, it's like you really do have to stand your ground. And to your question, I really don't care as much about kind of the hard skills. We can, I really need to like gel with their personality and understand, like, will this person give it their all for this client base and like really listen to these client base, but then also keep our vision going as well. It's, to me, like that first interview is like just a really get to know you. Like I'd rather almost have coffee with the next CSM I'm going to hire, because I just want to be like, are we going to gel? Are we on the same page with how we're thinking about who our company is, who our clients are, and how we interact between the two?
Well, I also think like what incentivizes them, because the fact of the matter is like some CS roles do have some form of a bonus or commission or whatever, but sometimes they don't. And either way, my best CSMs are ones who operate based on how they feel and what drives them, not that monetary initiative. And so I think it's really important that somebody understands that like my job is to make the customer successful, not happy necessarily, successful. And, regardless of if I get my bonus or not.
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's asked so often. But my one thing would be someone who thinks out of the box. It's if you get someone, and I made that mistake, right, where I would like early stage startup, we're trying to get the CSMs, and you hire someone from a bigger company with well-established, processes and check boxes and stuff like that. They cannot adapt.
Yes.
And in a startup world, like not is everyone playing multiple hats, the CSM even more so. They're doing everything. I mean, you just heard of they're doing marketing, they're doing, product support, they're doing sales, they're doing product management, they're doing everything. So someone who has this think outside the box, being more outcome oriented, is going to be successful. I've unfortunately hired some extremely good CSM from big companies who get so frustrated because there's not a process.
Yes.
And they get frustrated because they're like, I asked product for this and they never got back to me, and there should be a process for doing that. I'm like, it's one guy who sits across from you. You don't need a process for this.
And comfort level with ambiguity, I think, is very similar. Like being okay with the fact that there isn't a process is very important. Yeah.
It will come.
It will come.
Awesome.
We are just out of time right
Perfect.
now. So we're going to be transitioning over. But first of all, I just want to thank our panel for showing up so early.
Yay, thank you.